It's crazy when you think about how something like language can be so personal and yet spark such a huge national debate.
Yeah.
Like we just saw with the Tamil Nadu chief minister, what was his name again?
M.K. Stalin.
Right, M.K. Stalin. He came out pretty strongly,
Yeah.
against what he sees as Hindi being pushed on people through that national education policy.
Right, right.
It kind of forces us to really look at the whole language situation in India.
It really does.
And I think that leads us to this idea of what they call linguistic secularism.
Yeah.
That's what we're diving into today. What does that even mean? And what role has the Supreme Court played in shaping how we understand this concept?
Exactly.
So we've got some fascinating stuff to dig into today. We've got some big Supreme Court judgments, articles from the Constitution, and of course we're going to take a good look at this national education policy.
That's right.
So our goal is to, cut through all the political noise and really try to grasp those fundamental principles that are driving this whole linguistic landscape in India. Okay, so where do we even start with this linguistic secularism thing?
Well, I think the first thing is we have to acknowledge the huge role the Supreme Court has played in defining and protecting this principle. It's not some static concept. It's been shaped and interpreted through so many landmark judgments.
Right. And there's one ruling that feels really relevant, especially with everything going on with the NEP. It's the 2014 case of UP Hindi Sahitya Sammelan versus State of UP. What was the takeaway from that one?
That case really set the tone, I think. It basically said that linguistic diversity in India, it's not just a fact, it's a principle that the law needs to protect. The court made it super clear that India's language laws need to be flexible. They have to accommodate the tons of different languages we have. It's about coexistence, not hierarchy.
So it wasn't like creating a bunch of rigid rules. It was more about making sure there's a space for different languages to exist and flourish together, which makes sense in such a diverse country linguistically. Now, this was 2014, right? Were there any other big decisions around that time that also kind of fleshed out this linguistic secularism idea?
Absolutely. There was another really important case the same year, State of Karnataka versus Associated Management of Primary Secondary Schools. This one focused on something pretty fundamental, the right to choose the medium of instruction in schools. The court based this right on Article 19 of the Constitution, the one about freedom of speech and expression.
So they were saying the government can't force students to learn in a particular language, especially when they're young. That feels like a big win for individual choice.
Exactly. The court said that choosing the language a child learns in those early years is a decision for the student and their parents, not the state. And you're right, it connects directly to freedom of expression. The ability to learn and express yourself in the language you choose is fundamental.
Yeah, it's a powerful statement about individual agency within this whole idea of linguistic secularism. Now, there was an older case we came across from 1982. It was from the Allahabad High Court, Sunil K.R. Sastrabudhe versus Director, IIT Kanpur. What did that one add to the conversation?
That case was about Article 351 of the Constitution, the one that directs the government to promote the spread of Hindi. The Allahabad High Court clarified something really important. Just because the government's supposed to promote Hindi doesn't mean people have the right to demand education in Hindi. And more importantly, they said educational institutions can't be forced to teach in Hindi just because of Article 351 unless it's part of some bigger national education policy.
Got it. So it's more about encouragement, not a mandate to provide education in Hindi. It seems like there's a consistent message in all these rulings, this idea that we need to protect the linguistic freedoms of individuals and groups, and that inclusivity trumps pushing one language over others.
Yeah, I think that's a really good summary. These rulings show us a legal system that really values India's multilingualism. And all of this, of course, is based on the Constitution itself.
Right, the Constitution. We talked about Article 19 and 351. What about Article 343, the one about the official language?
Right. Article 343 states that Hindi in Devanagari script is the official language of the Union.
Okay.
But here's the thing. Official language does not equal national language. India actually doesn't have a national language because there's no single language spoken by everyone across all the different regions. The people who wrote the Constitution understood this, and it was a major topic of discussion back then.
And you mentioned this thing called the Munshi Iyengar formula from 1949. What was that all about?
So there were some people who wanted to make Hindi the only official language right from the start. But because of the huge linguistic diversity, especially the worries of non-Hindi speaking states, they came up with this formula. It said Hindi would be the official language, but English would still be used officially for 15 years. It was a way to acknowledge Hindi's importance while still considering the needs of other linguistic groups.
So even back then, the goal wasn't to just force Hindi on everyone. What about minority language rights? I know Article 29 is really important for that.
Definitely. Article 29(1) protects any group in India with a distinct language, script, or culture. It says they have the right to preserve and promote their linguistic identity. And the Supreme Court has been clear that this right isn't just for minorities. It applies to everyone, even majority linguistic groups in a state. This prevents one language from dominating a whole region, even if it's spoken by a lot of people. It's about making sure there's a fair linguistic playing field.
So it's about protecting everyone, not just those traditionally seen as minorities. And we've talked about this idea of promoting Hindi under Article 351, but as you've pointed out, promotion is not the same as
Imposition.
Right.
The government is supposed to work towards developing Hindi as a way to express India's diverse culture. But that can't be used to force Hindi on people or institutions who prefer to use other languages. It's about development, not making it mandatory.
So we have this framework of linguistic secularism based on court rulings and the Constitution, but then we have the National Education Policy, or NEP 2020, which seems to be stirring things up again.
Yeah, that's exactly what's happening. The NEP says it supports multilingualism in education, which seems good in theory. But there's been a lot of pushback, especially from states like Tamil Nadu. M.K. Stalin, the chief minister, has been pretty vocal about it. Their main worry is that the NEP, especially its three-language formula, might end up putting too much emphasis on Hindi and not enough on regional languages. They're worried it could upset the balance.
And this is where the Supreme Court's stance against language imposition becomes so important. Again, it's not just a political issue. It's about people's cultural identities, their connection to their mother tongue.
Absolutely. And I think this quote from Justice Krishna Iyer on the 216th Law Commission report says it all. He said, "I am all for Hindi as a personal preference, but I am all against Hindi by compulsion. Linguistic militancy will alienate and divide, but federal pluralism is democratic sensitivity." That really captures the heart of linguistic secularism. It's about choosing, not being forced.
Such a powerful statement. So looking ahead, what does this mean for linguistic secularism in India, especially with all these debates going on?
Well, I think we'll see a bigger push for states to have more control over their language policies, especially when it comes to things like education and administration. Each state has its own needs, its own demographics, its own linguistic preferences. A one-size-fits-all approach just won't work in a country as diverse as India.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And we should expect to see a continued effort to protect and support regional languages, making sure they don't get lost in the mix. And because the courts have been so involved in language issues, any attempt to impose one language on everyone will probably face legal challenges. Those Supreme Court rulings we talked about, they set some pretty strong precedents.
So the courts will keep playing this balancing act, trying to reconcile national integration with India's linguistic diversity, making sure language policies are democratic and inclusive.
Exactly. It's an ongoing process. And this idea of linguistic secularism, how it's been defined by the Supreme Court, it's going to be essential in navigating this complex landscape.
This has been so insightful. It's really helped clarify a lot of these issues.
Huh.
To wrap things up for our listeners, let's go through some FAQs about linguistic secularism in India, just to make sure everyone's on the same page.
Good idea. So let's start with the basics. What is linguistic secularism? It basically means accepting, protecting, and promoting all of India's languages with the understanding that no single language should be forced on anyone.
Okay, and we talked about that UP Hindi Sahitya Sammelan case. What was the main point the Supreme Court made there?
The big takeaway was that language laws in India have to be flexible and accommodating. They have to reflect the fact that India is a country with tons of different languages.
And another big question, does the Constitution allow the government to make Hindi the national language?
No, it doesn't. Hindi is the official language of the union government, but not the national language. And the Constitution actually protects people's language rights, which means no one can be forced to use a specific language.
What about the NEP 2020? There's been a lot of talk about that, especially the concerns raised by some states.
Right. The NEP says it supports multilingual education, but some states are worried that it might end up promoting Hindi too much and sidelining regional languages. The concern is that it could lead to some kind of indirect language imposition, which goes against this whole idea of linguistic secularism.
And lastly, can the government tell schools that they have to use a certain language for teaching?
No, they can't. The Supreme Court has said that students and parents have the right to choose which language they want to learn in. It's about individual freedom.
So the big takeaway here is that linguistic secularism isn't just some abstract idea. It's a core principle in our legal system, and it's something the Supreme Court has defended time and again. It's about protecting India's linguistic diversity and making sure everyone's language rights are respected.
Exactly. It's about recognizing and celebrating the fact that India is a multilingual country.
This has been a real deep dive. And for our listeners, we'll leave you with something to think about. In a country as diverse as India with so many languages and cultures, how do we balance respecting those differences with creating a sense of national unity? What are the challenges in making that happen both in our schools and in everyday life? It's a question that will continue to shape India for years to come.
That's a great question to leave people with.
So much to consider.
Yeah, there is.
Thanks for joining us.
Of course.
Until next time.
See you then.